Let's go through a little example to help cement this just a little bit more before we start deep diving into each of these areas. So let's go over an example here. The example is going to be simple. It's just going to be how to build a form, or mainly what we're going to be doing is we have this goal. We want to build a form. It's going to have a email address place and it's going to have a comment place, and that's it. And we just want to go over what might we do with the requirements, design, implementation, etc. And this is a very basic example. You could actually get really in depth and actually come up with big documents for something this small. But I just want to go over some of the basics so you understand how each of these areas works a little bit more. So the first area we want to look at is the requirements. So what do we want this form to do? We want it to collect email address and message. So that's what we want the original form to do. It's going to collect an email address and a message. Then send to and store in a database. So it sends that information across the internet into our database. And then we want to prevent the user from bad input. And this means in the email address, putting all these random symbols and not actually creating an email address. In the comment section, trying to insert code or do an SQL injection attack or something like that. We want to prevent that sort of things. So 3 basic requirements here. Then we're going to go into our design. How do we want to design this? Now, with the design, you can come up with a document, or you can actually sort of draw it out. A lot of times you need a front end and a back end design. So, maybe we just have a quick box here and we have the email place and then the larger comment place. And then when we draw it out, we go, actually we need a button too to submit that. So maybe we want to put that into our requirements, needs button, etc. So, just something to, you could always go back and forth between the requirements of design, depending on the model you use, and we'll talk about that more later. But with our design, we want to use HTML and CSS for building the frameworks of the form. So we want to build the sort of what we actually look at as HTML and CSS. Then we want to use JavaScript for verification of the input. And then we want to use jQuery and MySQL for contacting the backend. And jQuery, if you haven't heard of it, is just JavaScript, but sort of adjusted so you can send sort of post requests to a database. And then MySQL is just a database. The next part is implementation, and this is really, really easy. This is just code and document the work. Well, easy in this sense. This will actually be where most of the time is spent after we do these 2 things, is just sort of working it all out, setting up a server, setting up the front end and the JavaScript, etc. Now into verification, a lot of times the testing is just sort of an extension of the requirements. We ask questions of the requirements. So collect email addresses and message. Does the form collect information? So we would create a test to test, does it collect information? Send to and store in a database. Does the form send that information to a database? We can do tests on that. We can see, input it in the front end and then go check our database and make sure it's making it in the back end. Do maybe corner cases, trying to insert 100 different browsers at the exact same time, or trying to insert them all in sequence, maybe half a second after each other. Maybe there's a queue that gets overloaded or something. So those sort of tests will help make sure that you don't lose information. And then finally, prevent user from bad input. Try to do an SQL injection attack on yourself. Try to put really random characters throughout that wouldn't actually be a message. Maybe even spam prevention. Maybe we want to build a spam prevention thing in here and we would need to put that in requirements and design, but we'd test that as well. And then finally, we have the maintenance, which is just create a lifecycle plan and fix any bugs. A lifecycle plan can be as simple as check on it every 6 months to make sure that all the technology used is most up to date. And same with the database, update it every 6 months. Check any bugs, maybe update that every 6 months, or maybe you have a weekly schedule of how bugs come into your company or whatever. But a maintenance is just kind of coming up with a plan to make sure that we can adjust it to meet the requirements, to meet what we want it to do, and also to make sure that it isn't vulnerable. And there we have it. Just a very, very simple example here of how you might go through these steps, how you might sort of categorize just building a simple form. Now, in these next lectures, we're going to start jumping into the in-depth part where you can actually sort of use some of the tools that we talk about to do this, but for something much, much larger in scale.